Xavien Howard, did he completely reset the cornerback market? Let's break it down. The Miami Dolphins invested a ton in Xavien Howard. Everybody's calling it the richest cornerback contract in history. Let's break down the details first and then figure out, okay, was this the right move for the Dolphins? What do you got for the details for us, Sam?
Yeah, well, the headline details are 5-year, $76.5 million, 46 of which is guaranteed. We got some small font going on.
Yeah, can you see okay?
We're going to have to magnify that a little bit. So it sounds like on paper it's the richest cornerback deal in NFL history, and it is just. But if you look at it in a sort of average per year value, it's $50,000 per season more than Josh Norman's deal, which was signed 3 years ago. So that kind of inflation does not, carry forward the kind of inflation that we've seen with the salary cap over that time. So it's not really this kind of market resetting deal that it's being billed as.
Yeah, as we look at Xavien Howard, very front-loaded, as you said, $28 million in that first year. But now the question is, okay, first off, is he worth it in a vacuum? And then is he worth it with Brian Flores coming in, the new head coach from the Miami Dolphins, coming from the New England Patriots? Let's back up, though, real quick to college. When we broke down Xavien Howard, I'll never forget, you and I sitting there at the Combine. You had watched him first, and you kind of called me over. You said, you got to watch this guy, because there are certain plays where Xavien Howard, with his size, ball skills, length, you're like, wow, he looks like Richard Sherman. And then other times, he just looks like he shouldn't even be playing in the Big 12. It was amazing the roller coaster of emotions that you could go through watching Xavien Howard tape in college, and we've seen some of that in the NFL.
Right, and this was Richard Sherman a few years ago when he was pretty much unquestionably the best cornerback in the NFL.
Right.
So his high-end plays looked like something truly special, but the low-end plays was disastrous, and kind of the same thing you see now. He led the league last season in interceptions. The high-end stuff, again, looks fantastic. The low-end stuff, though, is disastrous, and it's immediate, and it's the same stuff we saw all the way back in college. Realistically, he's the same guy, just on a much bigger stage.
So because we are focused on every single play and every single grade, it's not just about interceptions for us. He only had a 75.3 coverage grade last year. I shouldn't say only, that's a very good coverage grade, but for a guy that's now has the richest cornerback contract, that's after a 63.6 coverage grade in 2017, 60.8 coverage grade in 2016. So we've seen a guy that was up and down in Baylor and up and down with the Miami Dolphins, averaging 14 yards per reception into his coverage over the last 3 years, but to go with those 12 interceptions. So there's some boom or bust to Xavien Howard's game.
Right, and I think then the breakdown becomes, what kind of scheme are those mistakes coming in? And when you start to break down and divide between man coverage overall, between zone coverage overall, you see most of his big plays come in zone coverage, where he's able to, defend a deep zone. He's able to keep his eyes on the quarterback. He's able to kind of keep an eye on all aspects of the play. The bad plays tend to come when he's up at the line of scrimmage in press coverage. He's got to deal with a receiver immediately and doesn't win at the line. And suddenly things go awry. He has to grab, he has to hold, he commits a lot of penalties. And now you're combining him with a scheme coming over from New England with Brian Flores that's as man-heavy as any defensive scheme in the NFL, at least assuming the same thing is going to come over to Miami. Do you want a guy whose biggest mistakes come in press man coverage and whose biggest successes come in off-zone coverage to be teamed up with that kind of defense?
Let me just go through some of the games in his career, though, because we've seen him play really good press man before. Back in 2017, the best game of his season that year was against New England. It was Monday Night Football. They were playing a lot of press man against the Patriots. That's how you slow him down. 2 interceptions, a pass breakup, 0 for 6. When targeting him, he essentially shut down Brandon Cooks. So even in 2017, New England, 93.4 coverage grade, 92.6 against Denver. You've got these super high-end games, but on the low end, against Atlanta that year, he gives up 91 yards. Against Carolina that year, a 29.1 coverage grade. We have seen him reach both ends of the spectrum when it comes to in-game, just one-game coverage grades. And then last year, his best games as well, against Indianapolis and then against the Raiders. In those 2 games alone, 4 interceptions and 3 other pass breakups. I mean, some of those interceptions were, like you said, zone coverage, great feel for replacing defenders in zone and dropping back, creating depth. Andrew Luck looked pretty silly at the end of the first half in that game. So, all this said, boom or bust for Xavien Howard. Is it going to be worth it for the Dolphins?
I think ultimately this is the kind of contract that's win-win for both parties. The Dolphins have signed him to this big extension. It's probably going to look cheap if he winds up being the cornerback they think he can be, right? If he matches perfectly in this defense, if he eliminates some of the negative plays, if he lives up to the positive plays, this is a deal that in a couple of years' time, when a few more cornerbacks are signed, will look like a bargain. They've staved that free agency off. They've got him locked down long term. But if it's a disaster, they can conceivably get out after next year. Now, next year will be expensive. It'll cost them $28 million, but they could get out before another $12 million of that contract becomes guaranteed. If he's on the roster then for 2020, that $12 million gets guaranteed, and then it becomes like basically a year-long rolling deal. But they can get out pretty quickly if the whole thing falls apart. And then for Xavien Howard, he's locked up a pretty sizable chunk of change for a guy who is inconsistent and could conceivably, have a bad year next year, enter free agency at the wrong time and just not get anything like this kind of money again. So I think Xavien Howard has taken a sizable bird in the hand, as they say, and the Dolphins have locked up a guy long-term who is capable of a huge amount of positive plays for them.
So let's call it a win-win for a guy like Xavien Howard, one of the more boom or bust cornerbacks in the entire NFL. We'll see if he is getting the boom in Miami over the next couple of years.